Hi, students. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're enjoying this Mother's Day weekend, and that maybe you're doing something special with your children, or maybe enjoying the beautiful sunshine that's outside our windows. So today we are going to be doing some reading. This is in your white books. It's lesson D. It's actually on page 116 and page 117. And notice that the title is All Things Are Connected. So I want you to think about that title, All Things Are Connected. I know that when you did grammar with Michael, you used a term for the grammar, connectors, because it talked about cause and effect, and you had one thing connected to another. So two parts of the sentence, actually they were each a complete sentence by themselves, but when you put them together, it connected two ideas. So the two ideas, just like a chain, right? Like two links in a chain, you piece those two together. They were connected. So this story, what I want you to do first is I want you to read this story yourself. So if you don't have a book or you don't want to go get your book, I'll just leave this on the screen and you can read it. Let me move this out of the way. You can read this story and see what you think. If you come across some words that you don't know, just underline those words. But remember that you can get a lot of clues just from reading the whole sentence. You might be able to figure out what it is. So don't just get stuck on a word. Just keep reading and see if you can figure out what that word means just from the words around it. All right, and then we'll be back in a minute to talk about what this means together. All right. So I'm gonna hit pause, and you can hit pause and just read this and think about it. All right, so hopefully you had time to read this story and to enjoy it. I hope you understood it, or you might have some questions. So let's talk about what kind of story. This is a little bit different than our normal reading. This is a special kind of story. It's called a fable. Okay, so what is a fable? Sometimes a fable is also called a folk tale. So a folk tale is a story that's passed down from generation to generation. So you might remember, or maybe this has happened to you, where your grandparents told you a story, and this is passed down in families. And that's how those stories were remembered before they were ever written down. So those are called folk tales. A tale is just another name for story, and folk means people. So that's what a folk tale is. A fable and a folk tale are very close to the same thing. A fable means it's a story that teaches a lesson. There's some idea there that they want you to remember. So because they want you to remember that, actually, a lot of times we tell our children these kind of stories because we want to teach them a lesson from it. But we want them to remember the story. And so sometimes they add animals. Sometimes the stories are about animals. Or maybe they'll even throw in some imaginary creatures into the story. Or maybe the animals will talk. So it's maybe not real, but it's fun, and in that way, we remember the stories. So I wanted you to think, and I want you to think about this title, All Things Are Connected. So we're going to read the story together. We'll read it through again. I'll actually read it out loud, and you can read it along with me. So I want you to notice that on page 117, there's a red box and it says useful information. And that normally is very helpful. And so let's look at what's in that useful information. Well, actually, let's look at the box that's at the top of the page. We'll do that useful information a little bit later after we've read it. But it's the information at the top that's also in a red box that I want you to notice first. It's about the cause and effect and how we can know which one is the cause and which one is the effect. So it says to find the effect, we ask the question, what happened? Okay, so the answer to the question, what happened, tells us what the effect was. And to find a cause, we ask the question, why did it happen? So why did something happen tells us the cause. And what happened tells us the effect. So I know that if you turn in your white book back a page to page 115, that's the assignment that Michael gave you to work on. And it gave a column that listed causes and effects. And actually each one matched up perfectly. The things on the cause, right across from it was the effect. So for example, it said there is habitat loss. So there was a loss of where these animals could live. And it was because of habitat loss that animals were moving into the cities. Okay, so that's just a little bit about that. But what I'd like to do now is go through and read this story with you. Okay, so here's the story. All right, let's go through this story together and you can read along with me. Actually, before we do this, I think maybe it's a good idea to go over some words. All right, so we said that a fable was a short story that teaches a lesson or a good idea. All right, so you might remember, and I hope that you do, some stories from your country. I know that in the United States, we have lots of fables. And I'm sure that you also have lots of stories like this in your country. And I would love for you to share some of those stories with me. So if you remember some of those and you would write a little bit about those back to me, I would love to hear what some of those stories are. All right, so I wrote down some of the words that maybe you underlined. Now, if I didn't get all of them, just send what that word is that you don't know, and I will write back what the meaning is. Probably someone else also had that question, so I might just send it to everybody. All right, in the story, it talked about a court. It said, this was like right at the beginning, it said, it's talking about the village chief, and it said that whenever he wanted to do something, he asked the members of his court. So probably you think about a court as like when someone gets a traffic ticket or they're in trouble, they have to go to the court. They have to go to court. Well, this is a little bit different. Because this is a village chief, he would ask advice from his court. And here it means a group of people that serve the king, or in this case, let me change king to, they served the village chief. So they were the people who gave advice. If he was a king, it would be to the king. In this case, it's to the village chief. Okay, you might have wondered what this word meant. To the croaking, it said that he couldn't sleep. The village chief couldn't sleep because every night he would hear croaking. Well, you probably figured this out, but he said it was from the frogs. So maybe you've been somewhere where there's a lot of frogs, and you can hear all night long, you can hear these frogs. So it's that low sound. So we say that the frogs say ribbit, ribbit. So they make this low sound. I can't do it very well, but they make this low sound. And if there's many frogs, it just goes on and on. You can hear the sound of the frogs. And we call that sound croaking. Sometimes if people are sick, they make a hoarse sound, not their normal voice, and we say they are croaking like a frog. Okay, so also, this is also in that first paragraph. It says that only one, the old woman, dared to give a different answer to the village chief when the village chief asked for advice. So dared to, this is a verb, like an infinitive though, but it's a kind of verb, means to be brave enough, to have the courage to do something. So she was brave enough. She had the courage to be different than everyone else. Most of the people wanted to just tell the village chief what he wanted to hear. Okay, but she was brave enough to give her own answer, what she thought was right. She dared to say something different. Okay, the next word that maybe you didn't know was consulted. Consulted. So consulted means asked others for advice. So the king or the chief, right here, the chief consulted his advisors or his court. He consulted his court about the frogs. This means he asked them, what should I do? Okay, that's a little different because consulted is to ask. Demanded means you tell someone or you ask someone with force. So I cannot demand that my students do anything because I'm not your boss. I can't demand anything, but the village chief, he's the one in charge. So he can demand that people do something. So the chief or the king demanded that all the frogs were killed. Okay, concluded. So I think you know the word conclusion. Okay, let me write it out here. You know this word. Conclusion means the ending. Remember that word? So this comes from the same word, okay? But the meaning here is a little bit different. Okay, so if we say the chief concluded, so I think, where is this? It actually says the chief decided to kill all the frogs, but the chief concluded that the old woman was a fool. So the chief concluded, that means he made a decision. He concluded. It's like decided. Okay, multiply. I think you know multiply, but you probably think about math. Like 2 times 4 is 8. We multiply those numbers together. But this is a little bit the same, but this is talking about the mosquitoes multiplied. So just like 2 times 4, it became a bigger number, only now we're talking about, 2 mosquitoes, and pretty soon we have many, many more mosquitoes, right? So some animals or bugs multiply very quickly. You start with just a small number and then pretty soon many, many more, right? So multiply here means to become more. So killing the frogs would make the mosquitoes multiply. So become many mosquitoes. Miserable. Miserable means very unhappy, very uncomfortable. So if it's like in the summertime, sometimes there's many mosquitoes. And in the summertime, sometimes it's hot, and then the mosquitoes are biting. And then if you have a mosquito bite, it itches. And pretty soon you are very uncomfortable. You are miserable. Okay, furious means very angry. Actually comes from, or it's connected to this word. Fury is anger. Okay, so that's the noun form. Furious is the adjective form, is very angry. So it means like full of anger or full of fury. Okay, summoned. It says the king summoned or called people. So we'll see the word summoned when I read it. Forced is like the same as demanded. Forced is to make someone do something. Because you have power, you can force someone to do something. And then the last one that I wrote down was fool. Remember, we said that the king concluded, or he decided that the old woman, she was a fool. So a fool is like the opposite of someone who is wise. So it's a person who acts unwisely, or a person who is not smart, not wise. All right, so now that we've gone through some of those words, let's read this together. All right. All right, so you can read along with me as I read this together, and that way we can be reading it together. So long ago, there was a village chief who never allowed anyone to disagree with him. Whenever he wanted to do something, he asked the members of his court for their advice. But whether the chief's idea was wise or foolish, his advisors always said the same thing. Indeed, it is wise. Only one old woman dared to give a different answer. Whenever the chief asked for her advice, she always replied, "All things are connected." One night, the chief was awakened by the sound of frogs croaking in the swamp. It happened again the next night, and the next, and the next. The chief decided to kill all the frogs in the swamp. When he consulted the members of his court, they replied as usual, "Indeed, it is wise." But the old woman kept silent. "And you, old woman, what do you think?" the chief demanded. "All things are connected," she replied. The chief concluded that the old woman was a fool, and he ordered his servants to kill all the frogs. Therefore, the chief slept peacefully. But soon, the mosquitoes in the swamp began to multiply, since there were no frogs to eat them. They came into the village and they made everyone miserable. The chief ordered his servants to go into the swamp and kill the mosquitoes, but it was impossible. Furious, the chief summoned the members of his court and blamed them, saying, "Why didn't you tell me that killing the frogs would make the mosquitoes multiply and everyone would be miserable? I should have listened to the old woman." Because the mosquitoes were there, all the people of the village were forced to go away. Finally, the chief and his family left too. Until he died, the chief never forgot the old woman's words. All things are connected. Okay, so that's the story. I hope you can see what they meant maybe by all things are connected. So there was a connection, right, between the frogs and the mosquitoes. And the woman knew that there was a connection. Maybe the other people knew too, and they did not dare to give their real opinion. They were afraid of the village chief. But the wise woman gave her opinion. And in the end, the chief was angry. He was angry at the other people because they did not give an honest answer. They only told the village chief what he wanted to hear. And in the end, the mosquitoes took over. There were so many. Okay, so there was a connection between the frogs. The frogs actually helped to control or make it be so that there are not too many mosquitoes. Having too many mosquitoes made the people very miserable. In this story, you might see some of those sentences with therefore. I think I remember reading therefore and because, since. Those were some of those connector words that you used, that you wrote. Maybe you wrote some of those types of sentences in your last lesson with Michael. Okay, so let's look at the next page. Has some questions. Not that one. Okay, right here. So here are some questions that I hope that you're going to be able to answer. All right, so there's questions. Why couldn't the chief sleep? What was it that was causing him not to be able to sleep? Think about that. Okay, he couldn't sleep because the frogs were making so much noise all night long. Their croaking was causing him not to be able to sleep. All right, so number 2, do you remember what he decided to do? All right, so remember he consulted. He called his people together and he asked them, what should I do? And did the people give him their real opinion? Number 3 asks, what did the members of his court say? And then they ask you, what did the old woman say? Was she the same as everyone else? Or did she say something different? And then what did the servants do? Because remember, he ordered them to do something. So what was it that he ordered them to do? And then because of that, remember there is a cause and an effect. Because of that, what happened? And then in the end, the chief was furious. Remember, furious means very angry. Why was he so angry? And the people had to leave the village. Why did they have to leave? So I want you to try to answer these questions, all right? And then I also want you to think about the title, All Things Are Connected. All right, so in this story, we see the connection between frogs and mosquitoes, and we see that the old woman was actually very wise, that the frogs were helpful. Even though they might disrupt his sleep, they were good, right? They helped control the mosquitoes. And too many mosquitoes make us miserable. So there is a connection. But in other ways in the world, are all things connected? Maybe think about this virus that has us at home right now, because I know that many of you have written to me and I've written to you and I've said, I would really wish that we could be together in class right now. And it's safe and it's right for us to maybe not be together, to stay home. And I'm happy that you're being careful and you're being safe, but we all wish that we could be together, and you wish that you could be together with your friends. And it's hard to do school with your children and not have your children going to school. I know that. And it's hard for many of you that are doing Ramadan not to be with your friends. But one little virus that is so small that we can't even see the virus unless scientists have a microscope or special equipment to see it, this virus can affect the whole world. You have probably talked to people in your country and they are having to stay home. It's dangerous all over the world, which is why they call it a pandemic, because it's not just here, it's everywhere. So we see that all things are affected. It's affected people's jobs. It's affected shopping. There's many things we can't buy. It's affected many things. So I want you to think about that title, All Things Are Connected, and think about how you see that. Maybe not just with coronavirus, but in other ways. Maybe this chapter has been about the environment and about pollution and about how we can save energy if we do different things. So you can think about other ways. All right, down here, this is about building your vocabulary. And here are some words. We have done some of these. So I'd like you to go through the story and find these words in the story. And when you see them in a sentence, I want you to think about what part of speech it is. Is it an adjective? Is it a noun or a verb? What part of speech do you think that it is? Okay, remember, an adjective is going to tell you about a noun. It's going to tell you about an idea or a person or a place, a thing. Okay, so this first one they did for us. So I can find that first one. It's find the word wise. It says, it starts in the second sentence. It says, but whether the chief's idea was wise or foolish, his advisors always said the same thing. So it's talking about the chief's idea. So it's describing an idea. And so an idea, that's a noun, right? So it's describing a noun that makes it an adjective. Okay, so wise. Now, an antonym. Now let's look in this box, useful language. It tells us an antonym is a word that means the opposite. So, for example, good. What's the opposite of good? Something that's not good is bad. Okay. The opposite of hard is easy. The opposite of tall, if you're not very tall, you might be short. Okay. So in this case, they actually, in the sentence, they gave us what the opposite was. It says whether the idea was wise or foolish. Okay, so here are the words connected. So connected means it's like it's together, okay? And if it's not, then it's not together, it's apart or not related, right? Okay, so you want to find and try to make a decision about these things. And then try to think of a word that would mean the opposite. Okay, so it says up here for number 2 for you to use a dictionary or a thesaurus. And for you to write the part of speech and to write the antonym. Okay, I just pushed pause because I found a thesaurus that I'm going to send you a link to that I think will be helpful for you. So I will pull it up for you, and then I'm going to send you this link. I think it will be helpful. All right, so here we are on this thesaurus page. So it's just thesaurus.com. All right, so I actually typed in the word connected. Sometimes if you just see examples of other words that tell you the meaning, it might be helpful. So I typed in connected, and it gives us a lot of other words. So you don't have to take all those words, of course. So you can just look for a word that makes sense to you, and of course, think about the sentence that it's in. So our sentence was, all things are connected. So here's all things are linked. Remember, linked would be like a link in a chain, right? All things are united, like all things come together. Okay. All things are combined. Okay, so I think all things are linked. This makes sense for what it means. All right. Now, those words are the words that mean the same thing. You need a word that's not a synonym. Synonym is for when it means the same. So if you go down to the bottom of this page, so just scroll down, and you will find antonyms. Antonym means the opposite. Okay, so here's the opposite. This is probably the easiest one. It has a prefix, those letters in front of it, disconnected. So this just means not connected. Okay, notice that all of these have prefixes in front. Uncombined, unconnected. Actually, disconnected is the one that you would hear the most. Disconnected, okay? So it's not connected. Here's connected, disconnected. Now, one thing I like about this website is it gives you lots of sentences. So I know when I was learning another language, when I was having to learn German, I loved to go to sites that had sentences with the words. So this might also be helpful for you to see these things in sentences. But this is a good site for you to just check out words, even if it's not these words, to put in other words to see what the opposites are, to see other words in English that mean the same thing. So I will also send you this link, and I hope that that will be helpful for you. All right, so what I'd like for you to do is to maybe try to decide what part of speech these will be. Try to find a word that means the opposite. The first thing you'll want to do is to find these words in the story. That will help a lot. Now, the other thing that I think it will be good for you to do, because I don't want you to forget your English, is they give you some sentences down here, some questions. And these are good just to be able to talk to somebody in English, okay? So you definitely don't have to do all these. Maybe pick one or two and talk to somebody in English, maybe your husband or your wife or your neighbor, someone you know, and do a little bit of talking in English. Here's a good question, number 5. What makes you furious? Remember, furious meant very, very angry. What kind of weather makes you miserable? Very uncomfortable. Okay. Here's number 2. Give an example of how plants and animals are connected, like cause and effect. Number 1, do you think that it's wise to follow people's advice? Why or why not? So just some suggestions of some questions, some ideas where you could talk in English. Okay. I've enjoyed talking to you a little bit. I sure wish we could do this in person. I hope you're staying well and safe and are doing okay. I hope you have a wonderful Mother's Day, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.